What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. Today I want to talk a little bit about contract extensions and the things that you guys need to know in terms of contract extensions for franchise mode in MLB The Show. Specifically, we're on MLB The Show 21 today, but let's go ahead and jump into the important points. First point that I want to jump into is the time frame of being able to offer players contract extensions. Now you guys can see that we have the date of August 3rd, so once you hit August you will be prompted with the opportunity to give your guys contract extensions. There are various other points that you will be able to give your guys contract extensions. Really, any point throughout spring training or the regular season, I just view as a way to get ahead of things if you want to offer guys contract extensions early and get it out of the way and make your life a little bit easier whenever it comes to the off season. However, one of the things that you will note is that whenever you actually look at your contract extensions at this point during the season, or at any other point during the season, you're not going to get opportunities to sign guys that aren't really on your 40-man roster or aren't at the MLB level. Generally speaking, all of those prospects and players like that have to be re-signed during the off season. That's kind of crucial for you guys to know, because most contracts for prospects are going to be one-year deals, and you're going to have to go through the tedious process, or you're going to have it set to auto to re-sign those dozens and dozens of prospects in your minor league system. It can be a pain in the butt, especially if you manually do all of your contracts like I do, but it is something that is absolutely worth knowing, that you can really only sign kind of MLB level players at this point in a regular season. The other thing to know is you cannot trade a player that is not under contract, and the only time that this really comes into effect is during the off season. And I want to kind of make a small dedicated video to that topic, but I did want to bring it up today because it's really important for re-signing players. Because when you hit the off season, a lot of people have asked me in the comment section over the years, why am I not able to make trades happen during the off season? Well, most of the time you're probably not able to make trades happen during the offseason because the players on most teams are not under contract yet. Most teams wait in the MLB game to re-sign their players in the offseason because they wait and see, what that player is worth, how they performed, all of those various different things, and so they're not under contract when you arrive at the offseason. Even a lot of times whenever you work your way through multiple weeks in the offseason, a lot of players will still not be under contract because there are negotiations going on, there's arbitration going on, there's renewable contracts going on, so the entire process is very lengthy, and it is something that can take a while, and so that's why you might not be able to trade players during the off season, and I wanted to make sure you guys have that point here in the middle of the video. The next big point, and in my opinion, most important point whenever you are re-signing contracts for players, whenever you're re-signing players, is to pay attention to the salary guide in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, because it's going to give you very important information as to what is going on with this player's service time, whether their contract is renewable, whether they are arbitration eligible, or they are free agent eligible. So there are various different things that you can do with players, and as you can see, if I decrease the number of years on Randy Arozarena's contract, you can see the value per year that he's looking for will go down. And the reason being for that is because of the service time status of the player's contract. So if a player has a renewable contract, I am able to renew their contract for I believe it is no less than 80% of what their contract was in the previous year, which means that his contract is probably in the $500, $600, $700,000 range, and so the reasonable price for him on a one-year extension would be about $750,000. Now, the player may not accept that right off the bat because they do actually have some smart AI in here in terms of accepting contracts, and Randy Arozarena would probably be a guy that's like, no, I don't want one-year deal. I would really rather have a multi-year deal. I want some security and things like that. You will actually get messages like that from the players. And so, even if you go into free agency and take a look at some of the free agents and try to offer contracts to those guys, very often you're going to get the same thing. So, for example, Miguel Rojas wants a 4-year deal. If you try to offer him a 1-year deal, it says, I'd like a longer contract, I need some security. That's the type of message that you'll get from these guys, because the AI is actually a little bit smart whenever it comes to re-signing contracts here in MLB The Show. Well, we talked about renewable contracts. I just want to give one more point on that. You have to extend an offer to a player to renew their contract in the offseason. If you never even attempt to extend an offer to them, they're obviously going to become a free agent. They're going to become eligible for another team to pick them up. So you have to at least extend a very low offer to them and have them not agree to it. And then you can renew it later on in the offseason for a really cheap amount. Most of the time, my players will accept that cheap contract or whatever contract I'm offering them prior to getting to the renewable stage, because most of the time you're probably going to offer them around what that renewable number is anyway, so they realize, hey, this is what I'm going to be making, I just have to deal with it. And then in terms of arbitration, that kind of changes the way a player sees their salary as well in the game, because in terms of arbitration, that is an intermediary, that is an independent opinion that is going to decide how this player played and what they're worth. So you're going to have the opportunity to offer that player arbitration, where you don't have to extend a contract offer to them, but you can extend an arbitration number of what you think that player is worth, and then it goes to the independent the independent person, the independent organization, and they decide based on the two numbers what you think they're worth, what the player thinks they're worth, and then it comes to a decision on what number that player is going to be paid for that season. And so, you have to understand those couple of things whenever you're going through contract negotiations to re-sign players here, because that is going to determine whether it's worthwhile to execute on a contract negotiation with a player at any given point in a season. For example, with Randy Arozarena here, he wants a 5-year deal worth $4.8 million per year. Now, that deal's not all that expensive. That might be worthwhile making that offer to him. But one thing to consider is if I go the renewable option route, I can get him for significantly less money because his contract's renewable. And I can play on that arbitration and get him for significantly less money because he has that arbitration. Now, keep in mind that arbitration can backfire, because if he plays really, really well, then the independent organization is going to say, hey, this guy's worth a lot more than you think he's worth, you're going to have to pay him more. So you have to consider those factors whenever you are re-signing players, and at certain points in the season, considering when you should re-sign a player. So a good example here is Arozarena, because maybe it's worthwhile as an 84 overall center fielder for me to offer him this long-term deal. $4.8 million per year isn't that much, and if I think he's going to exceed that performance, if I think he's going to be worth more than $4.8 million per year because he plays really well, then I'm getting a really nice deal there for my team. It might be worthwhile signing him now. If I don't think that he's going to reach that point, then very often it's worthwhile to just wait on negotiating a contract with him, offer him a lowball amount of money in the offseason, and bank on that renewable contract. Or if we go all the way to the bottom of our contract negotiations here, the bottom end of our re-signings, you'll see a good example of this, and that is Zach Little. Zach Little wants over $1 million per year. Now, that might not be crazy, but you have to consider this guy is a really low overall. He's only a 66 overall. So is he really worth over $1 million? Probably not. His 1-year value is going to be a relatively cheap amount of money. So for the most part, it's going to make sense to sign this guy to a renewable contract. It's going to make sense to renew his value at a very low price, because even if he develops, he's not going to develop into a super high overall. I mean, he's going to hit maybe a 70 overall, and he's still only going to be worth a really low amount of money at that point. The factors that you really have to consider are, how fast can a guy progress? Does it make sense to try to sign them to a long-term deal early? Things like that. And on that note, we can talk about a top prospect that is a low overall. So a great example here would be Joe Adele, who is only asking for a 2-year deal at $890,000. This guy's a 69 overall A potential. He's going to be a super high overall eventually. So the thing that you have to consider is it worthwhile maybe to offer him an extended deal, maybe a 5-year, 6-year deal or something like that. Just skip all of his renewable contracts and his arbitration, because by the time next year comes, or by the time his arbitration comes in a couple of seasons, he's probably going to be worth tens of millions of dollars per year because of how quickly his overall is going to jump. So does it make sense to get him on maybe $3.9 million per year now? That way when you reach that arbitration point, you don't have to overpay him. That's the type of thing that you have to consider. A lot of times it is worth it to do that. It's not necessarily the most realistic thing to do, especially in today's game. A lot of players have turned away from accepting these types of deals. Back in the day, you would have guys like Andrew McCutchen and players like that would take what would be considered team-friendly deals for 5 or 6 years, with both parties knowing that that player is going to be better and they're going to be worth more down the road, and it's going to help them both out because that player gets the big money up front, but the organization saves money on the back end. So those are the considerations that you have to come into whenever you're re-signing players in MLB The Show 21 or any MLB The Show game, because that's, you really have to consider their renewable status, their arbitration status, their age, their potential to grow, and what they're going to be worth down the line, in comparison to what you think you're going to be able to get them for.